So this particular seminar is devoted to the subject of flow and its relation to meditation. And therefore I have to talk to you first about certain characteristics of energy, because this world is energy. E equals mc squared. And if there is nothing except energy, we cannot, of course, say what energy is. Because if everything is energy, then there is no class of events or things outside energy, and you can only describe something that you can put into a class, that is to say, something that you can put into an intellectual box. But although you can't describe energy, or you can't even describe reality, everybody knows perfectly well what it is. You simply feel it. And you feel energy in terms of a multiplicity of vibrations. And those vibrations can, of course, be measured, as we measure light, sound, heat, weight, and so forth. But we cannot experience all the vibrations of energy at the same time. That would be the same sort of confusion as if you slammed down all the notes on the piano at once, or plucked all the strings of a harp at the same time. What we do, therefore, is we select. First of all, our senses are selective. The eye does not record the whole spectrum of light vibrations. The ear does not receive the whole spectrum of sound vibrations. They restrict themselves to a narrow band. And beyond that, we select in various other ways. There are certain vibrations which we consider noteworthy and important and worth paying attention to, and others which we overlook as being insignificant and unimportant. And thus a child will very often select experiences that adults deem ridiculous, because a child has not yet been taught how to select according to our preconceived notions of what should be picked out. And so children will cherish rubbish, for example, which adults think should be thrown away. They will notice features of people's faces which are not supposed to be noticed. They will do all sorts of funny things like that. And furthermore, a child will be taught which of these vibrations are good and which are bad. And the bad ones are, of course, to be avoided if possible. But inevitably they come up, because if you have a good-bad valuation of these various spectra, if you're going to have the good end of the spectrum, you also got to have the bad end. No matter how far you succeed in making life comfortable and pleasurable, you are looking at it with a scale. And at this end of the scale are the things called good. Therefore, at this end of the scale are the things called bad. Now, you may push the scale in the direction of good, you see, but there's always going to be a bad end, because there wouldn't be a good end if there weren't a bad end. Sometimes we feel the scale is going this way, and then we say things are getting worse and worse, because that's the way the scale's moving. But there's always the good end of it, so that when you're starving in a concentration camp, there are always certain events to which you look forward and which sort of brighten things up. You simply cannot have a continuous experience of life in which everything is completely bad, or an experience of life in which everything is completely good. But we are under the illusion that that could be arranged. And it gives us a great deal of trouble, being under that illusion. Anyhow, it makes sense. Indeed, in a very literal sense, it makes sense that we should be selective, Just in the same way as when we play the piano or play the harp, we pick out all these vibrations in different orders. And that's the fun of it. That's the game of existence. However, you can get hung up on your game. You can get into a fixed, rigid feeling that those vibrations which you were taught to select when you were a child, and that's the way you find out how to select, it's what people tell you. You can get hung up onto the idea that that way of selecting things is the way, and that there are not possible alternatives. And furthermore, that you could get into a state of consciousness where you could experience all vibrations simply as vibrations and not deem them either good or bad. And that would be the point of view which Buddhists speak of as seeing the suchness of things. That is Zen, is to dig whatever vibration happens and feel it simply as something going yoing, 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 you know? When we are little babies, we don't know how to interpret these vibrations because the world is something like a Rorschach plot. It is a wiggly patterning of energy. And the energy is the same as the patterning. There is no kind of stuff called energy, which is formed into patterns, just as there's no kind of stuff called matter, which is formed into things. The things, the shapes, are the matter. You see, matter, simply the word matter, is the same as the word meter. Does it matter? Does it amount to anything? That is to say, is it solid? We say something solid really amounts to something because you can't shove your finger through it and it might shove itself through you. That matters. I mean, it measures up. It's important. But it isn't made of some kind of stuff. It's simply an intense concentration of energy. And it always is on the move. Everything is flux. Like you see a candle burning and you say there's a flame. Now, a flame is a noun. But if I say the candle is burning, I'm using a verb. And that's a little bit, I think, more accurate. Because the flame is a stream of hot gas. And it moves with tremendous rapidity. So there is no, as it were, gas permanently in the flame. It keeps running. But the shape stays for a while. In the same way, an eddy or whirlpool in water may stay constantly in the same place in a stream for years, although the water is passing through it all the time. But every time we come back and sit on that particular bank of the stream, we see the same old whirlpool, as in the near Niagara Falls. Well, we are just the same as that. We are like flames, like whirlpools, and we are a stream, a very complex stream consisting not only of electrical energy, which constitutes our nuclear shapes, but we are also a stream of water, milk, cereal, vegetables, beefsteak, medicine, vitamins, heat, cosmic rays, heaven only knows. All these things are pouring through us all the time. But we recognize each other because the way in which it's playing, the way in which this energy is dancing, keeps a fairly consistent form. And we recognize those forms and we say, John Doe, Mary Smith, etc., etc., etc. But eventually, of course, it gives out. The form does what we call get old. Although we have ideas about that, you see, again, according to the way we've been brainwashed, we say, well, getting old isn't so good. But it's very beautiful. If you get your head right, that's a very grand thing to do. You can completely readjust your thinking about this. just as we accept the beautifully colored leaves in autumn. And as we say, we like a well-aged whiskey or a mature cheese. You see, it's all the same kind of a thing. So then, if you've been brainwashed into certain fixed opinions all life long, there is some importance, perhaps, into becoming more flexible, especially when a certain set of opinions that we call a culture or a way of life shows clear evidence of not working or of crumbling. We're in that situation today, a situation where we see that the view of the universe, which is fundamental to Western civilization, the Jewish picture of the world, the Christian picture of the world, even the 19th century materialistic picture of the world, all these things are not working. And people get terribly anxious when their basic view of how you should play the harp of life is not holding up. And therefore, under such circumstances, we have to readjust our consciousness and reset and find perhaps a new way of plucking the strings or of structuring the world. But in order to do that, we have to pass through an intermediate state in which we learn to experience the vibrations without putting values on them, experiencing them without describing them, naming them, or trying to fit them into some system of concepts, good and bad, high class and low class, refined or crude, or whatever, healthy or sick. We have to take right off all this thing and learn to have what is called in Zen mushin, meaning no mind. That means not no consciousness, but no conceptions, no fixed ideas, no one-sided view of things. It's really easy to do that, but everybody wants to try and make it difficult. People are compulsively complicated. And so you might say in an inverse way, there is a certain difficulty in not becoming compulsively complicated, because that requires a certain kind of intelligence, not what we call intellectuality in the ordinary way, not verbal intelligence, because that's not the only kind of intelligence. It requires organic intelligence. And that's the intelligence that you have in your organism that is responsible for your fantastically beautiful nervous system, for your veins, for your alimentary tract, for your glands, and for the color of your eyes. But we are not ordinarily aware of being in any way responsible for that. That's something that seems to happen to us. Just as, for example, we always think of gravity as something that just happens, and on the whole is not a very good thing. In a way, mankind has been engaged in a struggle against gravity. He thinks the bird, he looks at the bird with envy and tries to conquer the sky, you see, by force of some kind to get up into the air. You know, in aeronautical theory, we don't yet know how bees fly. Bees theoretically can't fly, but they do. And the reason for the magnificent flight of birds and bees is that they're not fighting gravity. Because actually everything in this universe is falling. The earth is falling, but it falls in a circle. The sun is falling, and it falls around some other star way, way off. Every object is moving because it's falling, responding to gravity. And gravity is the nature of energy. Energy is gravity, because energy invariably takes the line of least resistance. When you experience using energy not taking the line of least resistance, you are not really using energy, you are using force. And force and energy are different. Force is the unintelligent use of energy. It is not following the easy course. As so when you force a key in a lock, you're liable to bend the key or break the lock. It does no good. Sometimes, indeed, yes, we use strength. But there's a funny little old man, some of you know, called Suzuki Roshi, who amazes very strong young men at his ability to move rocks. And they swear he moves them by leaning on them. It's uncanny what he does when he works in the building the garden at Tassajara. That's judo, you see, and Zen very often involves the study of judo. Judo meaning the gentle way of finding out how the rock will respond to gravity and helping it along those lines with your own gravity, that is to say, with your weight. You use muscle, you see, very sparingly, but you use your weight in the right place, and that moves all sorts of things. So in life, in all one's doings, have the sense of that everything you do is falling. Even when you're climbing the stairs, you are falling up. And you will discover a very interesting thing, that people who know this in a natural way, people who haven't been taught, know it naturally. Babies know it. Many of our American Indians know this. And you will discover, for example, they don't make a noise when they walk. So many people, when they walk, you hear thump, 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 thump. Oh, there must be something wrong with it. Because if you walked like that in a forest, everything would run away or run after you or something. They'd know you were there. And in the forest, you must be anonymous. You must be one with the forest. So it is said of the expert in Taoism, entering the forest, he does not disturb a blade of grass. Entering the water, he doesn't make a ripple. And you can watch some of those South Sea Island swimmers dive. And they seem to go into the water like a knife, making no splash. You see, we like when we dive, we go jump on the end of the springboard and go zooming up and then flip over in a jackknife way and come down, splash, with a great commotion all over the place. They just fall, like cut the water. So they are following the line of least resistance. Now, the warning here, it is again to do with preconceptions. When we think of following the line of least resistance, what would it be like to do that? We have a notion in our minds that that would mean becoming droopy, improvident, feckless, or as we would say, behaving like an animal. Well, now, animals are much better behaved than we are. Much better. We are the world's greatest predators. Even sharks don't fly out of the water to eat us or catch birds. They stay in the water. And if you really observe animal behavior, you will see that although they have fights and although they eat other things like we do, they are very, very orderly in their behavior. And there are very few species of animals which practice torture on their own species. Very few. But human beings are impossible. They are so fouled up by the confusion of their concepts with their organic life, which never can come to any reason because you cannot, for example, arrange a compromise between black and white. Black and white are abstract conceptions. In nature, there is no black and there is no white. There are colors. And both the black and the white worlds are discolored worlds. So, the line of least resistance. Lao Tzu says of water, water seeks the low level, which men abhor. Nothing in the world is weaker than water, and yet it can overcome the hardest things. And when you watch water flowing over dry ground, you see it moving along, and then it suddenly puts out a lot of fingers. And then only one of those fingers continues, because that's found out, it's feeling out the path. And it gradually goes down and down, and if it gets into a place where it forms into a pool, it waits there, and then it rises. And then it finds a place where it can go over, and it goes on. So the use of energy is the same. That then is a secret in the art of meditation, which means that you don't force things. You don't try to meditate. Because what meditation consists of, essentially, is being aware without conceptualizing. In other words, learning to get rid of the verbal chatter that goes on constantly inside one's head and that I call thinking. Temporarily stop that. It isn't that thinking is bad. It's only that thinking all the time is bad. That would be like talking all the time and never listening to anyone else. So the problem for many people, you see, is how to stop thinking. Because it's become a habit. It's a nervous tick to think all the time. And so we create endless problems by doing this, because people who have various miseries, they lie awake nights thinking about them. That means they are chattering to themselves over and over and over and over and over again about their problems and don't know how to stop it. So in the course of this weekend, we are going to explore experimentally various ways of enabling our awareness or our minds to be quiet. You know, Tim Leary made the famous remark that to come to your senses, you must go out of your mind. Where mind means certain fixed thought patterns, certain fixed valuations of how one ought to select experience. And Ronald Lang, in his book, The Politics of Experience, has pointed out that we have an etiquette concerning what experiences are legitimate, in just the same way that we have an etiquette as to what gestures are legitimate. You know, you're not supposed to put out your tongue at people, except in Tibet, where it's a remark of respect. You're not supposed to cock a snook at people. You're not supposed to be what they call an exhibitionist. You're not supposed to do all sorts of things that are taboo gestures. See? Well, in exactly the same way, there are taboo experiences which you really aren't allowed to have. And if you start having taboo experiences, they're going to put you in the nut house. They're going to call you a schizophrenic, a psychotic, a paranoid, a psychopath, and all sorts of bad names. Because you see, these are the new, up-to-date forms of heresy. And just as heresy was a taboo form of religious belief at one time, nobody takes religion seriously today, so we don't have the Inquisition anymore. The not having an Inquisition is a function of not taking religion seriously. If we did take it seriously, we'd have an Inquisition. Because we would think it was terribly important that we saved people from going to hell. I mean, the kind of religion in which you have heaven and hell. So today, though, what we take seriously is people's psychiatric state. See? So you can, in other words, be imprisoned without due process of law, confined under unspeakable circumstances, and literally tortured for your own good. Just as the inquisitors of the Catholic Church tortured heretics for their own good. It's the same old thing all over again. Only it keeps changing its place in the spectrum, you see, so that we suddenly are unaware where we are doing things like that. So we are watching the beginnings of a psychiatric revolution represented by people like Thomas Sass, Ronald Lang, to break up what they call psychiatric fascism and to ask for due rights for the so-called insane, just as earlier in history the Protestants and religious libertarians were asking for due rights for freedom of religion. We will need a new Magna Carta for freedom of consciousness. And of course, all the brouhaha going on about psychedelic chemicals and marijuana and so on is a religious fight. It's all the same kind of thing as quarrels that we had in the past over sacraments. Who had the true sacrament? Whether this Catholic formula was the right way of transforming the sacrament, or whether the Protestant formula wasn't just as good, and all that kind of thing. It's all happening all over again. And it's just wonderful to see the repetitious patterns in man's history. Sometimes rather depressing too. So then, in meditation, the real art of it is to be free from concepts. But that implies something else. Very difficult for Americans to understand. That you are not meditating when you are meditating for a purpose. When you are doing it because you think it's good for you, because you think you're going to improve yourself, you can't improve yourself. Or anybody else for that matter. Just as you can't lift yourself up by your own bootstrap. And when you give up trying to improve yourself, you have all that energy available for things that can actually be done. So when there is no thought about self-improvement, about going somewhere, about achieving a different state of consciousness, about being simply here. That's the only place you can be, actually. Because when you remember the past, your memories are present experiences. When you anticipate the future, your anticipations are present experiences. There's nowhere else to be. Where's your hurry? So the art of meditation is essentially relaxing the verbal commentary on the world that constantly goes on and coming to center which is the present. Or coming to center in the sense that gravity teaches you to center yourself. I want to show you something here. Lama Govinda was here a little while ago. He was asked, why do Tibetan Buddhists use prayer wheels? Isn't that superstition? And he said, no. This is a method of centering. This little ball on the end of a chain revolves around the prayer wheel just in the same way as the earth goes around the sun. And when you get the knack of getting this thing going and keeping it going, it does things to you. You don't have to think about it. It's a kinesthetic experience. And you just keep it moving, clockwise. Otherwise, you unwind the prayer tape in the center. Mm-hmm. It isn't prayers, it's a sutra. It's a set of mantras or of symbolic sounds. And you can keep this going indefinitely. And it's a gas. Because of what it does to your consciousness.